when I did a video on this accident, it created a minor controversy here in North Texas, or at least on Facebook, if that's a tempest in a teapot. Lots of claims that I was doing clickbait and I was totally wrong and I hadn't had my head up where the sun doesn't shine. Well, the final report is out, so let's see what the NTSB came up with. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and I'm going to look at what the NTSB final report says about this accident. I was accused of being a lousy journalist and doing pernicious clickbait in addition to being totally wrong about my observations of what data was available for this accident when it first happened. So I'm going to run through this stuff and you be the judge and whether or not I can see the sun or not. I didn't rush to post this update. I prefer to leave the field to those who were so anxious to silence me, figuring that they would post the truth of the matter because they said that's what's going to happen. Well, it's been a while and it didn't happen, so I figured I'd do it myself. And one thing I want you to remember is that I'm not a journalist, never claimed to be, no. I don't cover accidents. In fact, I'm uninterested in the cause of a particular accident. What I'm interested in is the examining of what the pilot did to deal with the situation. You know, if it was a hole in the case, the engine case, well, okay, fine. It's what happens after is what's important to me. I do that to look at the available, I look at the available facts, the ADSB, and then whatever I can find, and then determine the best fit theory for the accident to discern what pilot actions were and how successful they were. There's always more information that's going to come out at a later date, and some of it's going to be material. Some of it might materially change what I've said, and sometimes it doesn't. So I believe that any of these accidents that I look at could happen to any pilot, no matter how experienced they are. I'm not pointing a finger at somebody. I'm saying these accidents could happen to us. What can we learn? What's the best lesson we can learn from it to prevent it happening to us? So what I found in the past is that folks tend to obscure or embellish the story depending on how they perceive they look in it. Usually I'm not interested in that at all. I rarely like to talk with participants for that reason. I'm not reporting an accident, okay? What we're doing is using the accident as a framework to talk about actions and what we can do as pilots. So if it's a mechanical failure that precipitates the event or a pilot mistake, well, at some point it's going to be evident, but the important point is that what the cause of action would have resulted in what course of action would have resulted in the highest chance of survival. So the first thing I was accused of was getting it totally wrong. I mean, absolutely. They looked at one thing and then said everything was wrong. I started off by reviewing the ADSB record of the flights. I counted 5 flights for less than 5 hours. Not an atypical break-in profile. The reports were that this was the 3rd flight for the airplane. When I do the math, it works out that the accident flight was actually the 6th flight. Well, maybe they didn't count those short hops, you know, like the trip around the pattern or the 30 minutes and whatever. I mean, seriously. What happened was the airplane was able to climb 100, 200, 300 feet, whatever it was. It probably was less than 200 in the air, staggering through a left turn of about 130-ish degrees and then crashing through a tree line and ending in a field inside the downwind for runway 17 at 50 Fox. I'll leave a link below the original video and you can use that as your look at it. Seems like a partial power situation to me. I mean, why would you suspect otherwise? Well, it turns out I did get this wrong. The engine was apparently producing full power or near it throughout the entire operation. Makes you go, So during the controversy over this video, the story about the aborted takeoff followed by the accident takeoff changed at least 4 times by my count. In the end, the story coalesced around a practice run of some sort prior to the actual takeoff. And the engine data from the monitor show a full power run of about 30 seconds or so. And the co-owner's statement to the investigators said that a full power run was done to check the pressure relief valve operation. But even that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of disconnects here in this story. Whatever. Based on a first responder witness statement to me, who's my neighbor at the time, about the switch settings in the cockpit when he looked inside. He said the AC was on. I highlighted the possible effect of leaving the AC compressor on. Well, I've got no experience with the AC in a 210, but I do have in Bonanzas, and the belt-driven compressors rob a lot of power from the engine at the worst possible time at takeoff, so you got to turn it off. It's on the checklist. It also is on the checklist for this 210. For those who don't think an electric motor doesn't create a drag on the engine as well, I'm sorry, but that's just wrong. Any electrical drag is huge, and whatever. You don't know that. So I still think it's a valid observation and a lesson learned, even though the NTSB didn't comment on it at all. But follow the checklist. Learn how to follow the checklist because your life may depend on it. Maybe it didn't happen in this video. We'll stick by and we'll see what was revealed. At the end of the video, this first video, I noted the reports are often wrong and there's almost always more to the story. Well, here, and there's sure more to this story, and frankly, it's not good. So, what did happen? According to the NTSB accident incident report, these are the pilot's own words. Okay, he arrived to fly the airplane, and it was fully loaded and fully fueled. On rotation, the airplane failed to accelerate or climb, never gaining a positive rate of climb. The gear was unretracted, and the propeller left in high pitch. As I was approaching the rising terrain, a shallow turn to the left was initiated to see if I could gain altitude. Approaching a line of trees I was unable to turn inside of, I elected to face them perpendicular and see if I could climb over them. Unable to clear, the tops were contacted and power was reduced to idle. At this point, I immediately went into a short field flare and contacted the ground in an open field. Okay. So that's the pilot's report and the incident report. The NTSB found that the pilot reported he was conducting the third maintenance test flight after a new engine was installed, and it purportedly had flown all the previous flights. Additionally, he had the airplane co-owner and 2 other passengers aboard. The airplane was full of fuel, and no pre-flight weight and balance calculation was performed. Oh, by the way, it did have tip tanks installed, and the new engine was a turbo-normalized installation. Not real common for P210s. I like the turbo-normalized installation in Bonanzas, and I'm sure it would do great in the 210, but there are issues there that need to be noted. Side note here is the POH says for normal takeoff to lift the nose wheel at 65 to 70 knots with a climb speed of 80 to 90 knots. For a short field takeoff to lift the nose wheel at 65 knots and climb at 78 knots until clearing obstacles. The POH also says to retract the gear after clearing the obstacle and retract the flaps above 85 knots. And that's kind of what the pilot did. He left the gear and the flaps down. There was a note to not reduce power until flaps or gear are retracted. So the final report said that during takeoff, the pilot rotated at 51 knots. There's a disconnect, and then the pilot added nose-up trim and rotated at 55 knots and climbed slowly. The co-owner reported hearing the stall warning horn, and the pilot continued to climb. The pilot made a left turn to avoid terrain and set up for a forced landing. The pilot then reported the airplane was overweight. He reported the airplane was overweight, and there was no pre-accident mechanical malfunctions or failures that would have precluded normal operations. It's in the accident incident report. So, the pilot rotated early and never accelerated. The final report showed a post-flight computation of the weight and balance discovered that the airplane was 359 pounds overweight. That's a significant factor that can't be dismissed and should be 359 pounds. Let's go back to the co-owner's statement here. I've abbreviated a few things for length, a little bit for length. The pilot reported at 31 inches, 2,700 RPM, and 34 to 36 gallons per hour fuel flow. The mechanic was confused about why they aborted the takeoff. This is that first thing. The pilot commented, "Oh, it didn't like that." The mechanic told the pilot to keep it at 31 inches and no higher. He was concerned that the pilot did not use a checklist. He didn't expect the takeoff, power in and accelerated. No call-outs from the pilot. The PFD indicated 51 knots just inside the white arc. The airplane came up 6 inches and settled back down. The pilot rolled in a little nose-up trim off the ground at 55 knots, very slow in climbing. He told the pilot they were really slow and heard the stall warning horn. He is confident that the pilot was not looking at the airspeed indicator. Not sure why he rotated 20 knots below rotation speed. The pilot made a left turn to avoid terrain at the south end of the runway, and he knew they were not going to make it back around to the runway. He told the pilot to put the airplane down in a field. The mechanic did not know anything was wrong until he heard the co-owner talking about landing in a field. For whatever reason, the pilot did not push the nose down and land in the big field on the left. They then aimed for the small field on the right. The airplane mushed into the trees and hit the ground quickly thereafter. So the pilot flying in the left seat, the mechanic's in the right seat, the co-owner's in the back seat, and then there's a mechanic's assistant is in the very back. So that is the setup for the flight. And that was the notes that the investigator took when he had a conversation, probably telephonically, with the owner. So also, after the accident, the co-owner computed the weight and balance. That's apparently where it came from. With full fuel and 4 occupants, the load was 1,562 pounds. The useful load of the airplane was 1,250 pounds, and the takeoff weight would have been about 4,359.3 pounds. That's where the 359 pounds overweight comes from. As I said, this would have significantly increased takeoff roll and the acceleration and climb that go along with it. Okay. One thing I do know about turbos, turbo-normalized Bonanzas in particular, is that their takeoff performance at sea level, at lower altitudes, like that aboard on field, is worse than normally aspirated engines. Okay, I've talked a lot about that in other videos on the A36TN takeoff performance, and there's some accidents that I reviewed that were directly related to that. There is no reason to believe that a hit on performance would not also apply to this P210. So you accelerate down the runway, you try to take off, it doesn't work, so you accelerate some more, and then you take off. It's a short runway into a hill. 17 is right into a hill. The 800-pound gorilla here is the test flight with 3 people on board and full fuel. Overweight in an airplane with a brand new turbo-normalized engine. You don't know the performance characteristics of it. You already know I advocate dedicated flights after maintenance with minimum crew. It's got to be, we got to check everything out. Not only the operation, but the performance of it as well. Lots of links in this chain in this accident. I don't think I'm going to, I have to go through the laundry list here. There are lots of lessons learned, and you be the judge about how many I got wrong from the original video. From my perspective, the airborne to crash part is what counts, and I don't see how I got that much wrong. Okay, so whatever. One of the biggest lessons to learn from this escapade is that complacency can bite anyone. Always keep on the lookout. It doesn't hurt to double check things just to make sure. Oh, and just what is your strategy to abort a takeoff with an acceleration problem? Okay, how do you tell what is the markers for inadequate acceleration, and how much runway do you need to stop? It's also in some other videos that I've done. I think it's a very critical thing to do. I do it every time I take off. So there you have it. I may be a jerk, but I'm not a bozo. Maybe. So thanks for watching. See you next time on FlyWire.